World Environment Day, and very welcome to this last UNDP hour of the week. We're joining you live from Stockholm, which has really been buzzing with activity this past week, as Sweden and Kenya have hosted the climate conference Stockholm Plus 50. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres was here along with state leaders, ministers, and many others. And it's been a week. And it's time for us to wrap it all up with youth leaders and activists from different parts of the world with the United Nations Development Programme, United Nations Environment Programme, and the Swedish ambassador of the conference itself, Johanna Lissinger-Peitz. This hour and a half is with and for young people, and I remember being a teenager myself, having this feeling that something urgent had to be done, but feeling just as overwhelmed by my own powerlessness. Luckily, things are changing. Youth are not only raising their voices, they're also invited to participate in decision-making and are an indispensable factor for change. And we'll speak to some of them throughout this show right now. So stay with us for this hour and a half for a summary of the Stockholm Plus 50. We'll learn the status of the climate talks from young people's perspective. We'll celebrate this World Environment Day together and hear from these essential young voices of change. So let's do this. Our first guest is Johanna Lissinger-Peitz, the ambassador for the whole Stockholm Plus 50 conference. Basically an ambassador for, as we say here in Sweden, hela Tjottaballongen. So Johanna, welcome. Hi.
Hi, Clara, and thank you for those words. And that's actually exactly how I felt this week.
The whole Tjottaballong?
Exactly.
So just like a brief summary of what you do. You oversee and lead the preparations and the execution of this conference. You had 6,000 people registered to attend from 146 countries, this including 10 heads of state and 110 ministers. Wow, first and foremost, but also, how do you feel now, 2 days after the finish line?
I think I feel happy, exhausted, but also a little empty, I have to say, because I have lived with this project for more or less 1.5 years. So, of course, waking up the day after, and still with the feeling, I think, of the last hour of the closing plenary, which was a very positive hour. But then waking up the day after, just yesterday, you feel happy, you feel, all of the tiredness from a very long project coming to an end, also makes you feel a little bit empty and kind of, where is everyone? I want to talk to my colleagues that I've been working with, because this has really been a team effort also.
Yeah, I can imagine. And do you mind talking us through what's been going on here in Stockholm on Thursday and Friday this week?
Absolutely. But if I may, I think also I will just start with actually how we, through these 2 weeks, what we actually managed to deliver 2 days. And I think, everyone who participated at the conference, everything that was going on here, all of the associated events, together, that was really delivering an Stockholm Action Agenda for action, renewable and trust. And that is not, one single speaker, it's not one single event that is doing that, but it's everything together. And in a way, of course, the official conferences started with the commemorative moment, and then, of course, the opening speeches, and that was one of the highlights for me, sitting there, having been working with this and listening to the Secretary General being so clear on action, being so clear on the importance of a multilateral system, and also emphasizing so much the need to look beyond growth as a traditional measure for how we measure well-being and welfare. We have always said that the heart of Stockholm Plus 50 was the leadership dialogues that took place in 3 different constellations, reflecting on the urgency of action, sustainable and inclusive recovery, and accelerated implementation. And through those leadership dialogues, very elegantly led by our co-chairs, we managed to deliver key actions for an outcome and a way forward. And that together, I think, with all of the side events, etc., has really been amazing.
What have your hopes been for these 2 days and this week?
I think my hopes has been very much that delegations coming to the meeting, civil society, member states, were going to take the opportunity of the characteristic of the meeting. So looking beyond the traditional positions that we often hear at climate COPs or biodiversity, and really take that opportunity to have an honest and constructive and sometimes difficult conversation. And I think also it, in a way, delivered on that hopes in the sense of focusing on system actions and not just the small step, but how do we actually need to transfer the system.
And what has been the most challenging, in your opinion?
The most challenging, I think, has been to be able to communicate that communication and dialogues matters. That even a meeting that did not have a negotiated outcome actually is a contribution to deliver on 1.5 on the future ambitious framework for biodiversity. And I think also we did that very much in the sense of addressing the system change through everything from the economics beyond growth, looking at high impact value chains, looking at the multilateral system and how we need to work together, and above all, everything also actually trying to do our best to include youth and have a serious discussion on meaningful youth participation.
I will talk more about meaningful youth participation during this hour and a half. The Stockholm Environment Institute and the Council on Energy, Environment and Water published a research before or leading up to the Stockholm Plus 50 saying that the world is at a boiling point. And we keep hearing these alarming messages. And there was something that really caught my eye here, because it said that the solution to the planetary and inequality crisis, it already exists. From growing public support for structural change to accelerating clean technology. So the different parts exist, but there is a lack of action. Do you share this sentiment?
I think yes or no. I think absolutely correct that there different solutions do exist. I think it's not a lack of action, but it's insufficient action. So we have to do more. And I think also, you know, ahead of this meeting and ahead of every large environmental climate meeting, there is always this discussion of lack of action. I personally think that it's quite important that we start to kind of nuance what we mean when we talk about lack of actions. For I think, you know, everyone probably who have been following this week here at the Climate Hub, if you have been out at the Stockholmsmässan at the meeting, you do see that there's a lot of things going on. But we are not doing enough. We are not doing it with the right speed. And we also need to be bolder in the sense of taking more decisions that address how we actually work through the different systems.
But why? Why aren't we doing enough?
It is a difficult journey, to be quite honest also. I think transition towards, if we take the example with climate, transition towards 1.5, or addressing the plastic pollutions, things we know that we have to do, that we have a very limited time to act, but some of these things needs to take quite decisions that involve, you know, many sectors in the government, that involves long-term investments and changing shifts on finance, on what we actually invest in. And that takes time. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't be able to do it faster, but I think that is one reason, actually.
So the following hour will be a lot about the youth perspective on this conference. How have you seen the participation of young people during the past couple of days?
Maybe let me just say that throughout the journey of Stockholm Plus 50, I have learned a lot about opportunities and challenges in how we actually can do a meaningful youth involvement. You know, I had maybe a vision for this when I started this job, organizing a conference, you start to see things from the inside, and you realize also that some of the things that you would like to do, the current system is actually not allowing us to do. So Stockholm Plus 50 is a UN meeting. It means you need to follow the rules of procedure for a United Nations high-level meeting. It means that there is a quite strict procedure on, who is speaking in plenary, at what point of that speaking, how long can they speak. So I think, we have to start also to look at how we actually change those things. My sense at Stockholmsmässan, and I'm sure we have other colleagues here who will be speaking later, who may have additional things to add to this, but we worked quite hard through the Youth Task Force that Sweden established in Glasgow, which is a constellation of around 45 different youth participants from different parts around the world, in a way of bringing together a global perspective. We also had quite a lot of youth events ongoing, a youth assembly ahead of the meeting also. But I think we can also do more and better. But we learned, and we also had a very, I think, and I can come back to that later, interesting discussions with colleagues from the incoming COP presidency on climate, who I think is watching what we have been doing very closely to learn from that when preparing for Sharm el-Sheikh later this year.
And have you been able to see how the youth are engaging in this?
Absolutely. I mean, also it's a lot of focus on the 2 days, but the project has been going on for quite long, and we have had quite a lot of dialogues with youth representatives. If you walked around the Stockholmsmässan and Stockholm Plus 50, you also have the chance to talk to colleagues that I have only seen on the screen, coming from India or from Japan or from Egypt. And it was also great, really interesting to actually get to meet these people and have a conversation. And there were different side events on this topic also, being able to present some of the outcomes that the youth constituency have been working with.
Thank you very much, Johanna, for your update. You and I are going to move to the sofas to continue this talk with a group of prominent young leaders. And while we move, you're going to take a look at this. Welcome back, and thank you to the UNDP country office in Peru for this beautiful video. Now, joining us here from the sofa, we have our first panel and our first 3 panelists. Johanna, welcome back also. We have Juan Pablo Celis Garcia. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me.
You are the youth program coordinator at the United Nations Environment Program, who were the United Nations host for the Stockholm Plus 50. And Arkana Soring, welcome, a member of the Secretary General Youth Advisory Group on Climate Change. And Maximo Mazzocco, welcome.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good, how are you?
Great.
You are the founder of EcoHouse Global, which is a youth leader at UNDP, and also a leader in extensive work with volunteers worldwide. I'm so happy to have you all here. Let's start with you, Arkana. I'm just going to say I have a couple of questions for all of you, but feel free to interrupt. Feel free to just grab other people's questions if you have anything you want to say, okay? We all love a good interruption. But Arkana, on the first day, you were here on this stage together with the UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights and the Environment. What is your analysis of what has happened here in Stockholm during the past days?
First of all, I would like to say that I'm very happy to be here again for the last UNDP of Stockholm Plus 50. And I think the conversation which we had with Special Rapporteur on Human Rights and Environment, that was an opening for the entire setup of how Stockholm Plus 50 has been. Like, it's high time we are facing impacts of climate crisis, environmental degradation, and now it's really crucial to see human rights and environmental protection and restoration together in intersectionality. And I feel Stockholm Plus 50 ahead of COP27 gave us the opportunity for different stakeholders to come together and have a dialogue to discuss on the mechanism how we can ensure in terms of implementation. So for me, Stockholm Plus 50 is more about the people I met. Is the indigenous people, local communities leader, young people across the globe, different like-minded people who are willing to contribute towards ecosystem restoration, climate action, which gives me a lot of hope. But at the same time, I also feel that there's so much more action which needs to be done. And when we talk about action, it also comes down to enabling and safe environment for indigenous people and young people. And as Ambassador was saying, I'm very happy to be part of the youth task force of Stockholm Plus 50. And also of the Youth Assembly which we had. And I would like to strongly propose and advocate for the implementation of the policy outcome document of Youth Assembly, because I think the youth have said what needs to be done. Now, I think it's really important to work with the youth in terms of implementation of it. So I think it's really, for me, it's also like we are in this last UNDPR. It's like we are going ahead from COP26 to COP27. I think we need to emphasize more in terms of implementation of the commitments which we have been making for a while.
And as an indigenous person yourself, representing the Karya tribe of Bihaban village in India, how do you think the decisions made during these meetings and conferences will affect you and your people and your community and country?
I think what we are discussing here is a part of a global policy making process. And global policy definitely impacts my community, definitely impacts the people I come from and the place I come from. And I think it's really crucial to understand when we are talking about climate crisis, that we all are affected by climate crisis differently. We all are affected and impacted by environmental degradation differently, which also brings down to the fact that these policies which we are discussing, these commitments which we came and made here, will definitely make it, if there is stronger implementation, will create an enabling environment. If there is non-implementation, then we will be again more vulnerable and suffering from these impacts of climate crisis. So for me, I think all the commitments made here, all the dialogues made here is personally affecting me and it's personally affecting each one of us in a very different way. And for me, I feel it's really important that we prioritize meaningful leadership of indigenous people and local community, preserve and promote the traditional knowledge and practices of ecosystem restoration and climate action. Also ensure that we are prioritizing rights recognition of indigenous people over the land, forest and territories, and protecting the land defenders, because I think it's really crucial. And as I said in my first panel also, that indigenous people, young people, women needs to be leaders of climate actions and not victims of the policy. So we really need to be part of this processes to be able to contribute, and it's like nothing about us without us.
That's right. Juan Pablo, I'm turning to you now. As responsible for the UNEP's youth programs, I'm curious about the youth engagement during this conference. Is the UN walking the talk here?
Well, I
And you
think
can be
it's-
honest now.
I'm actually in UNEP coordinating a program that is called the Young Champions of the Earth, which basically empowers young people that have ideas on the ground and projects at the grassroots levels. We support them with initiative, with training, and we guide them through a process so they grow exponentially in their ideas and their projects. But if we talk about Stockholm Plus 50, I think it is a clear example that civil society need to be engaged in every step of the process, and that young people need to be involved in every step of the process, not just in a conference like Stockholm Plus 50, but in any UN conference. There has to be, young people involved in every step of the way. If we talk specifically about Stockholm Plus 50, there are a set of recommendations that came out of the conference, and two of them specifically target young people and future generations. And this is thanks to the leadership of young people that came into the conference. You mentioned the task force, the policy document that came out of the conference as well from youth. The young people really step up and took real action to make sure that these recommendations were taking place. One of them is to recognize, as you mentioned, Archana, the right for a healthy and clean environment as a right. And another recommendation that is really affecting also future generations is the one on intergenerational responsibility for decision making, and this means that in every UN conference, in every international forum where there is a decision to be made, youth need to be involved in that decision, and that's I think one of the important outcomes that came in from the conference. And the UN has gone really through a process, a step-by-step process on meaningful youth engagement, on bringing in young people inside and out. And I think we're getting closer to that meaningful youth engagement that we're aiming for.
So, in your opinion, we are listening more to young voices now than maybe before?
I think we've made some advancements. There's certainly much more to do. But I think that young people have made themselves very clear and have been loud enough that this meaningful youth engagement idea is not just going to be an idea anymore. And I think in the next couple of years, we're going to see really how young people are making those decisions in there. It has been a process, but I think we've made some advancements.
Do you have examples, or any of you, do you have examples of what actually happens when youth are invited to participate in decision making?
Yeah, I'll give you a very clear example. So in the UN turned 75 years old a few months back. We had a commemoration of the 75 years of the UN system. So young people were leading some consultations across regions. They were getting together. They were, they were collecting some ideas and conversations on how the future of the UN should look like. And the UN 75 came out with a declaration, which mostly young people was the one that took part of that declaration. Thanks to that consultation process, thanks to those consultations for UN 75, Our Common Agenda became a reality. Our Common Agenda, it's a set of priorities and recommendations that the Secretary General is giving to member states to ensure that we are achieving the SDGs and the Decade of Action. And one of those priorities is about youth, which means establishing a UN Youth Office, establishing a future envoy for future generations, and having a Transforming Education Summit, a Transforming Future Generations Summit. And this is on the process of becoming a reality. And that's when we talk about real youth action, because those consultations that young people were holding, those inspired an actual resolution that member states welcome Our Common Agenda, and it's going to become, hopefully in the next few months, a real, tangible result of youth action within the UN system.
That's amazing. Maximo, I'm turning to you now. It's the World Environment Day with the theme Only One Earth. What does this mean to you?
Okay, hi, how are you? Thank you for inviting. I agree with everything my colleagues and friends here said. One Earth. Usually, some of us introduce ourselves not from Argentina or from Brazil. When they ask where we are from, we say from Earth. It's like we are global citizens because we already understand that the ecosystemic benefits are not from only one country. We need to work all together. We are all interconnected. And as a person that studies environmental science, that is something that you understand in the first three classes. That's why we, in our daily basis, try to educate. It's one of our main areas of action. So we, as humanity, we can involve again with our nature, our real nature. And this is not like something to say and a slogan for Facebook, or because if not, when we stand up or we sit down and we listen the plenary sessions of this kind of event, we always say the same. We are one Earth. It's time to act. Our nature. But what that means. So in this event, I was very happy to see that some words were included in a way that now after the group that our colleagues just said, as youth, as a community, as human beings, putting this in agenda, some words like ecocide, we understand it differently. If we talk about ecocide, 5 years ago, we were maybe hippies or crazy person. Now, our Senate, for example, talks about that words in a daily basis. Why? Because we explain what that means. Ecocide is not when we make disappear a jungle for a real estate development business. No, for example, no, it's not only a tree. It's the whole living, every living being that is there, that is totally interconnected, that make that, for example, in our country, no floods that give us oxygen, that some communities live from that. So when we kill a tree, we are killing a whole ecosystem that we depend on that. So when we say one Earth, it's like trying to explain that from now on, well, many years ago, but from now on, as youth, we need to understand development, economical development, in another way, understanding that we affect every people on Earth. We know that Europe is Europe, or the North, many countries of the North that are rich right now are like this because of the Global South, no? So the consequences now are on the Global South, but also on the North, because we didn't thought about this connection.
Thank you. So a question for all of you. Feel free to just jump in and grab the question. Which is the best way to engage young people?
I would like to say that often when we talk about young people, we also see as, representations. So it's like, I think it's really crucial also to emphasize both on the representation aspect of young people's participation, but also look as young people are professionals. They come with expertise from different thematics, different backgrounds, and different skills. So mere only emphasizing on representation, we need young people for consultation or, to participate in events or engagements, without giving that opportunity and power to be part of the policy drafting process, implementation process, monetary process, advisory roles and all of it. It's again tokenizing youth participation, which again makes me feel that when we talk about how young people needs to be participate and engaged, one, I think it's really crucial that we ensure young people are having access to this policy making spaces and also being supported in the initiatives and entrepreneurship skills and all of the communitarian approach which they are doing on ground also, so that it's like we have youth who are being supported for the work they do, and the youth who are being part of the youth constituencies being able to be part of this decision-making processes, and also youth who are not part of UN constituencies, because I think I really want to emphasize this, that we have youth movements and youth groups apart from UN youth constituencies also, and it's high time we make sure that there is an intersectional approach from institutions, that we are bringing them all together. And when I also talk about how meaningful leadership of young people, I think it's important to emphasize that youth in all diversity, because for me, I'm also indigenous, I'm also women, and I'm also youth. So if you only just speak about youth and not see the gender aspect, not see the indigenous aspect, we are losing out on the most critical aspects. Yeah, groups. And that's why I also feel that often engagement also needs to come from a lens of intersectionality and, taking into consideration different identities of young people. And at the end, I would like to say that there are still a lot of policy spaces where we absolutely have no representation of young people, and we definitely need to create those spaces for young people. So it's like, at the end, most of our youth are working voluntary without any support. And that's a huge, huge concern when we talk about climate finance or we talk about allocation of finance. It should also be making sure that whatever young people are doing, it turns out to be part of their jobs and not in the volunteer capacity. So it's like allocation of funds also for, youth participation, youth engagement and leadership is really, really crucial as a solution.
Yeah, I think I wanted to add on that. I'll give you a very clear answer. There are 3 different ways that for me I envision meaningful youth participation. One of them is having young people working as part of the workforce of the international organization. That means young people like me and young people like other young people who are working in the organization and are being part of these, the decisions that are made in the entity. The second point is young people that are part of the government, the member states delegations that are making these decisions, that we ensure that there is young people under 30 or under 35 being represented and being there and speaking in behalf of their governments and trying to make decisions also that concern to their population. And the other one is civil society, which you've mentioned also, Archana. It's something that I think there has to be integrated. It's not just young people as attendees to a forum or just as speakers to a forum. It's young people that were developing that forum, and it's young people that are negotiating that forum. So that's member states, the entity that hosting you, and the civil society.
Johanna, your thoughts?
Yeah, just a few reflections, and I listen and learn a lot, not just from the process, but from the conversation here today also. And maybe just from adding a few perspectives. First of all, I think you're absolutely right in saying we need to be much better in also involving youth on country level, on the ground, which I have to be honest and say, if you are in my position, that is not an easy task, because you reach out to, the UN organizations, to Yango or to the UNEP Children and Maize Group, and that is kind of our avenue in that. So I think, for this week, you talked about meeting the people and conversation. Some of my takeaway was actually meeting the people who are working on a country level on the ground. But we need to find, I think, the avenues to integrate those much earlier. And then also, I think you all spoke about, it's not just the meaningful participation in the youth UN system. It's about, for me, youth as solution provider, innovators, etc. How do we involve young professionals, which I think is important also. And then one thing that is important for, I think, meaningful participation from my perspective, if it's meaningful for you, it's up to you to decide, but it's when we look at the time perspective ahead of a conference. What was useful from Stockholm Plus 50, from an organizer's perspective and co-host, was that we were able to always take part in the development of the policy paper, not the final product presented at the meeting, but as is evolved throughout the spring. I could take that message back, and when speaking in other forums, speaking to my minister or speaking to Kenya, we could kind of look at those messages during the road. And I think that is extremely important in processes like this, because when you actually come to the meeting, most delegations, you have written your brief for your minister, you know what you will say in plenary. So at that point, it's too late. So really that time perspective on when you work with these different policy papers, maybe ahead of Sharm el-Sheikh, for example, making sure that delegations get to learn about the content well in advance for those meetings.
Panelists, do you have anything you would like to ask Johanna or bring up as we're sitting here?
I would like to say something about youth, that investing in youth is like investing in the best renewable energy we can have. And sometimes we feel that we are not, the diversity of youth is not representative. I will give you an example. We are always talking about renewable energies. Okay, we need lithium because we do batteries with that. No? It's one of the main ways of have a sustainable energy matrix. Okay, from where do we take the lithium? If you come to a country from Argentina, the north, we have one of the biggest reserves in the world. In that place, there's a community living with young people. I don't see the young people of that community here. They are not invited. Because if they are invited, they will say, no, I don't want you to take my lithium. I want to live there. So we have so many contradictions right now in what we think we have to do. Of course, we are in a transition. Actually, if you ask me, in 10 years of doing this, I don't know if we really know how to accomplish all the SDGs at the same time, because they are all totally contradictory with the technology we have right now. So it's like a comment, like a question, like a reflection maybe. We already know youth took the agenda for... Now the agenda is where it is because of the youth. Because we are the ones who use the social media, we are native in technology, digital natives. In the last 4 years, we grew like exponentially, and we can communicate because now it's not monopolized. Before it was monopolized by the TV. For example, now I do an Instagram video or someone in a community and has 1 million reproductions. So we are the ones that are pushing, and the ones that are inside this system, because now there's demand, okay, we need to do something. I'm totally speaking in a figure of speech. So how do we really do what we just said? We are professionals. We understand that we are inheriting this problem, this huge problem. It's a multi-crisis. No, it's not only the 3 crises we are talking about here. It's social, it's ethical, it's emotional, it's political, it's economical. Half of our population is poor in our country. 7 out of 10 children is poor. I don't see those children engaging in these kind of events and saying what they feel every day, being poor, with no access to health, to education, to a lot of stuff. And the statistics say that we are not going to be better in the next couple of years. So it's like a reflection of how, for the next kind of events, we can have that voices, and also remind that in 2 days or 15 days of a COP, we are not going to change the world. The important stuff happens in between, usually.
Johanna, do you have an answer
I'm
for
going
this?
to start exactly where you ended, that the important stuff happens actually in between. The COPs, the meetings are there with a very clear purpose of, the mandate for each of the meeting. But if we, and I said this earlier also in my intervention, if we are, I think, serious about implementing meaningful youth participation, we need to have a conversation of exactly what you were talking about. How do we reach the diversity of youth, the country level, the different levels? And if you're, working for the government in the position I do in preparing this meeting, reaching out to, the ground level in a country, it is difficult. So we tried through the Youth Task Force, where the Youth Task Force in themselves, say, here's an open call for everyone who wants to join, and then went through a quiet readers process on who could do that. I think that was our best attempt to try to be as inclusive as possible. This was one example. We learned a lot. And I think, also what I've seen just, I would say the last year, actually, a lot of things have happened. Governments are now starting to pick up. We need to do different. We need to do better in including youth. It's not going to be an easy journey, but an incredibly important journey. And for that, I think having the conversations with youth on how we do it together, and what are the short-term things that we can change, what are the longer-term things we need to change in the systems, having those conversations in between meetings with a kind of open and sometimes humble understanding for some things go fast, other takes longer time. But that conversation, I think if that is not happening, we will not succeed, and we have to succeed.
Thank you. It's the World Environment Day, and I think so far our discussions have mostly been centered about climate, but what else do we need to keep an eye out for? Juan Pablo?
Well, I think that it's very clear for me to see that young people are really doing their part, and they understand what only one Earth means. Even when they were not born 50 years ago, when the Conference of Human Environment was established, which was the message was only one Earth. Even after 50 years, when young people are now here, they understand what this really means, and they keep building even with the circumstances. They keep building, they keep inspiring, they keep speaking up, and I think that it is a very clear call to the older generations that what we're doing for that only one Earth needs to be stronger, that it needs to be meaningful, and it should have no delay. So that's what I think that my message to young people is, and to older generations.
Mm. And it's said that we are now in a triple planetary crisis. Would anyone like to explain what is meant by that? Arcana, perhaps.
Well, I think what I feel at this moment is like we are having COVID-19 crisis still. We are having a climate crisis. We are having environmental degradation. We are having loss of biodiversity. I think there's so many crises at the moment which we are facing, which are again can't be seen as silos, but is being affected intersectionally to us. Like, as a person, as a community, as indigenous people across the globe, we all were affected by COVID-19. And being affected by COVID-19, we were still affected by impacts of climate crisis because there was immense cyclone, landslides, floods, and heat waves across. So I think we are in a situation, in a point where we cannot let this continue. And when it comes down to cannot let this continue, it requires a transformative change and change in structures, and also bringing in policies and structures in place. And it also requires that at many places, it's important that we have laws and policies in place at national levels. At the same time, we also requires implementation of it, which again brings down to the fact that implementation needs to keep people at center, rooted in justice and respect to one and all. At the same time, I would also like to say to all the young people that you are doing amazing in terms of what you do. I would also like to say that you are who you are, not merely what you do. It's a long run, it's not a sprint. So let's take care of each other in a collective effort, because we need to go a long way and hold our leaders accountable. And this crisis can be fought only through collective efforts together.
Thank you very much, Arcana. And with those words, I unfortunately have to end this panel. Thank you, Maximo. Thank you, Arcana, Juan Pablo, Johanna, for coming here and having this discussion. And now we have a little treat for you watching this. With a powerful voice, she has become something of a phenomenon on the Swedish music scene. Recently nominated for a Swedish Grammy for her both timeless and contemporary music, she now joins us on World Environment Day to share her commitment for the climate with you. This is Sara Klang.
I got two loves. One's always hurting me and making me sad. I got two lives. One's gone, the other one is driving me mad. I got one heart and it's burning like California. Time is running faster than horses on a beach. And why do I always cry when beauty hits my eyes? I will go anywhere, anywhere to find myself, 'cause I feel so lost all the time. Do you have anything or anything for me? I will do everything for a cure, oh baby. I got two loves. The ones he beside me like he said he would be. And I waited so long to be your girl, but yet I wanna feel free. He's got one heart and it's burning like California. Time is running faster than wild birds in the sky. Why do I always cry when beauty hits my eyes? I will go anywhere, anywhere to find myself, 'cause I feel so lost all the time. Do you have anything or anything for me? I would do everything for a cure, oh baby. I got one life and I'm scared to fuck the whole thing up. Always say the wrong words and hurt the people that I love. They got one heart and it's burning like California. Time is running faster than horses on a beach. And why do I always cry when beauty hits my eyes? I will go anywhere, anywhere to find myself, 'cause I feel so lost all the time. Do you have anything or anything for me? I will do everything for a cure, oh baby. Anywhere, anywhere to find. Hey, hey. I feel so lost all the time. Hey. Anywhere, anywhere to find. You know, I feel so lost all the time.
Thank you so much, Sara. That's beautiful. And hello, my new panelists. What a lovely view to be met by. So, my new friends here on the stage are Natalie Mandongo. Hello, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
You're the Youth Fellow in Finance with the UN Climate Change High Level Champions team. And we met the other day up in the studio up there for a nice talk. And Isabel Axelsson, a Swedish climate activist active in Fridays for Future.
Hi.
Welcome.
Thank you.
And Benyam Gebreski.
Hi.
Welcome.
Thank you.
You're the program specialist for civil society and youth at UNDP's regional hub in Bangkok.
That's correct.
Lovely to have you all here. So, Stockholm Plus 50 was held over 2 days this week, but the preparation went over almost 6 months with what we call the national consultations. And these were national dialogues that took place in 58 countries around the world to surface opinions and insights at the national level. And 46,000 people participated, with a significant share of them being young people. 11% of the participants were younger than 18 years old, and 50% were younger than 30 years old. And Natalie, you took part in the consultation in Zimbabwe. Can you please tell us about this?
Yes, so you described it perfectly. Over 50 countries focusing on the global south were had. So I heard your earlier panel where we were talking about, you know, there's some people who aren't really here. And how do we get them here? That's what the national consultations were for. In the Zimbabwean consultations, we had, for example, young people, women and people with disabilities as the most vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, biodiversity loss. And then we had another consultation with NGOs, CSOs, and communities, because those are the people with the links to the ground. So that's how we make sure that we involve those people who may not be within the UN system. And then, of course, we had a consultation with business and private sector because one of my colleagues was talking about implementation, and oftentimes governments are limited, whether it's in you know, the short time frame that they're in office or with resources. So really engaging the private sector and business is important. In Zimbabwe, we had over 2,000 participants, and to just give you an idea, at Stockholm Plus 50, there were 3,000 people here. So you might think, you know, 2/3 of what was said at Stockholm Plus 50 came from Zimbabwe. But, you know, I had a conversation with Sweden's Minister of Foreign Affairs, and I took the youth-written Zimbabwe policy paper all the way up to her and discussed, you know, what we wanted to see out of this conference, because I think there was a lot of criticism about, you know, where is this going? What's the purpose of this conference? Although I do think that there is value in dialoguing, as Ambassador Pates said. But what do we want to see in the lead up to Sharm el-Sheikh and beyond? So that was what the point of the national consultations was, to bring people who are the most vulnerable to the effects of the triple planetary crisis to the highest levels, when unfortunately they aren't able to participate sometimes, trying to get those voices here.
I imagine that's a challenge.
A big challenge.
So, Benyam, you represent UNDP that has been organizing the country consultations in over 50 countries. What are your comments and thoughts on this?
Well, it's been a fantastic road to Stockholm Plus 50. We've engaged in about 20 countries. And what was really exciting with this one is that we actually had time to prepare properly, and a lot of young leaders really run with it, really making sure it's as inclusive and open as possible. A lot of consultations specifically with young people and indigenous people, persons with disability, really trying to create space for the different sectors and different segments to really have their time together with others, but also in their own. We reached thousands of young people this time. There was a huge interest, a huge appetite. I saw young journalists, I saw young members of parliaments engaging I cover from Samoa to Iran, and we just saw the plethora of engagement this time. A really, really exciting journey.
I can imagine. And Isabel, 2 days ago there was a strike and a demonstration, and it sounded like you were quite critical. Can you tell us a little bit about these demonstrations?
Yeah, of course. So I'm an activist in the Fridays for Future climate strike movement, and during the conference we organized a big climate strike to put pressure on the politicians, all of them here in Stockholm, but also to show that we're the youth, we're listening, and even if we're not participating in the conference, we still have a voice, and we're still putting pressure on politicians, we still know what's happening, and we know that we need to do so much more.
So what's your take on the conference?
So my take on the conference is a little bit, you were talking about that it was a little unsure. The communication about what it was about felt very weird. What is it to do? What are we going to achieve with it? And it felt very celebratory for 50 years, but in these 50 years, we're still continuing to subsidize fossil fuels even today. And is talking about earlier when just here on this stage, talking about the amount of fossil fuel subsidies that have been going out just this past week is huge. And not only just the fossil fuels, but also to deforestation and destroying indigenous lands, and here in Sweden too. So while this conference has felt very youth-washed and green-washed, especially from Sweden's part, we have been trying to get activists from all over the world in Fridays for Future to be here to participate. So they've had the accreditation and badges in, we've had funding, we've had places for them to live, and then Sweden's just like, no, you're not getting a visa. So we've had activists stranded in countries that aren't even their home countries because they don't have a Swedish embassy in their country, especially in Africa. We had Sierra Leonean activists stuck in Nigeria because they couldn't get home because their passport was still at the Swedish embassy. So we've had big issues with that, and Sweden has still been putting out this message of there's so many youth and they're all participating, but we've been locked out. Some youth have been able to participate, but it's been very exclusionary on who.
From my perspective, since the Fridays for Future movement started, there has absolutely been a change in attitude. But what kind of concrete change have you actually managed to make?
So we haven't seen the concrete change that we need or that we want. So in Fridays for Future, we want the Paris Agreement to be filled, and we want climate justice, and we want MAPA to be listened to. And MAPA is a term we use instead of Global South, which means the most affected people in areas. And these are the people who are affected the most by the climate crisis, but have contributed to it the least. And it means like countries like Sweden and countries like the USA or just in the EU need to take responsibility for historic emissions and the present emissions, and ensure that we're not continuing to exploit, and we are making up for the past exploitation of our countries. And that is not something that we're seeing being done, and we're not seeing it being taken seriously. So that's unfortunate. But I guess, as you said, like attitudes have changed. I think that is a concrete thing that we have achieved, because without the change in attitude and the spread of knowledge, we're not going to get anywhere.
Yeah, and just sorry to interrupt.
Go ahead.
Just
I love
to add
when people
on to
interrupt.
that, you know, you were speaking about we haven't seen concrete change, at least within climate change. The COP26 Paris Rule book has been finalized, you know, and so now there's no excuse to not be implementing at Sharm el-Sheikh and then in the UAE and beyond. So now that that's been finalized, there's no more excuse to not implement.
Yeah, exactly.
Benny, what are your thoughts on this?
No, I totally agree with my colleagues. It's still been too slow. And despite efforts to really push for impact and real results. I think we see progress for sure, but not at the scale and the speed that we need to see it. And for many of us in UNDP, our initiative is Climate Promise, where we really look at the progress of the implementation of the Paris Agreement. And so, for example, we've jumped from 40% of the countries, including youth, to 80%. That's a great progress. Suddenly the doors are opening up. But in terms of the next steps of actually seeing change on the ground, yeah, there's a lot to be done. So there's a couple of 2 steps forward, 3 steps back. This constant juggle, and I think we need to have a clear focus on the target, which is actually real impact on the ground for people.
So it's obviously the time for being critical, as you all are, but which things are improving? For example, are youth being more listened to? Or do you have other examples?
I mean, I think youth are being listened to, but we add more value than just being voices. We should be partners. You know, the report that I mentioned that I presented to the Swedish foreign minister was compiled by a youth organization faster than UNDP, and the government of Sweden was able to create a report on the national consultations in Zimbabwe. So we should be included as partners because we do have that energy, we do have the resources, and we do have the capabilities. You know, we shouldn't just be listened to. We should be involved in the design of these programs. We should be involved in the funding and the disbursement of the funding of these programs. We should be involved in the monitoring and evaluation. So it shouldn't just end at listening, you know. Yeah.
Can I jump in there?
Of course.
I definitely see a lot of progress. I think especially from governments, they're opening doors much more. Where I see areas where there needs to be progress is really, I think we do have a lot of youth responsive. You know, when young people in the room, that has progressed well. But youth transformative, which is actually really looking at holistically a young person's participation and the barriers to participation. As Archana said earlier, there's many reasons why people can't get into the room. So I think that's definitely a message I'm picking up on from young people, that we need to look at the whole participation slightly differently moving forward as we've done progress. But also look at the whole journey of young people's participation. It's not just the participation in policies and grassroots innovation and so on. There's a lot of risks for young people. And we see in Asia Pacific, there's been a huge growth in attacks against young climate activists as the youth movement is gaining strength. We also saw 4 attacks per week, and many of them with lethal consequences. So we had over 227 just last year of serious attacks on young people. So as we start looking at the empowerment and the engagement of young people, we also need to look at climate justice, this kind of really access to to access their rights through legal empowerment of young people. So there's a lot of things that comes with progress. Then you look ahead of what's missing. So
and it's all interconnected.
It is very much.
Last week, or this week, at the opening session of the conference, the president of Kenya, who is co-hosting together with Sweden, said that by the time we head to COP27, we should aim to have developed a comprehensive, holistic and transformative package of environmental actions. And with COP27 being kind of just around the corner, do you think we're on a good track to that, Isabel? To reaching that, I mean.
I think there are a lot of nice words, and I think that is what a lot of these meetings are about. Politicians and world leaders and participants, especially from the politician side, say a lot of nice things, or we pledge this, we pledge that, but a lot of it is not actually happening in real time. It's not happening on the ground. It's not happening where the people are. So I think a lot of work has to be done to be on the way to where we have to be. And we're not there yet. But I really, really hope that we will be soon.
Yeah, and not that I don't think there's a problem with not enough. Of course, we can go further, but there's also often a mismatch. So I work as a finance youth fellow with the high-level champions, and oftentimes if you're working with financial institutions, they just don't offer appropriate financial institutions, whether it's for Africa, whether it's for youth. They're not, risk-taking in their capital. Oftentimes the returns aren't attractive to them. And so there's kind of a mismatch between the commitments being made and what is required on the ground.
Benyam, or from what we've heard and spoken about now, it's a lot about youth not just being voices, but being partners and being a part of the actual change. Do you have examples of how to engage young people in good and productive ways?
Thank you. I think the word meaningful youth engagement has come up quite a lot, and I think there's a consensus among all of us that comes with a couple of principles. Really, the climate crisis is a human rights crisis. It's so many aspects to this that makes it difficult to just narrow it down in one way or another. But from what I'm seeing, it's I'm just so inspired just hearing all the hard work that you guys are doing. And in Asia Pacific, for example, we have one initiative called Youth Empowerment in Climate Action Platform. And one effort that we are trying to make is that as UN agencies, how do we work together to provide the different pieces of the puzzle so we really look at pathways? Because the type of support you need now might differ in a year from now. But what is the different types of supports? So here we are trying to come together as an international community, working with youth organizations to provide more holistic support. So you might need expertise in climate negotiation, or you might need expertise around consumer patterns, or you might need data. How do we all come together? So there are more and more efforts across at least UN agencies together with civil society to really provide that package support that is needed, I think, when you move from this kind of big commitments to actual impact now for young people.
If I may, I actually have a good example of youth engagement myself. Since 2005, UNDP in Sweden has published the book Blir världen bättre, which means is the world getting better? And I remember getting this book in my hand a couple of years back, and I read it, and I was pleasantly blown away by how by the realization that the world is getting better, and we're doing poorly when it comes to environmental issues, but we're doing very good in a lot of other questions. And as a person who's not as involved as you are in these questions, it's quite relieving to know this. And the thing is that this book has become teaching material in schools in Sweden. And in March this year, an interactive remake of the book was launched in a digital platform to further stimulate learning on sustainable global development and the global goals, which I think is great. And I was happy to be part of the launch event. And there was a video created to go with the launch to hopefully inspire and educate and bring people to this platform to educate themselves. And I think a lot of youth in Sweden feel powerless and maybe alone. And I hope that this brings hope and education for them. And I think, do you want to take a look at the clip?
Sure. Absolutely.
Let's watch.
Nej, det där är ingenting för mig alltså. Det är damfotboll, det går sjukt långsamt. Alltså det är skittråkigt. Shit, sorry. Att få rasism i Sverige, det är klart att...
Vi har ätit kött i tusentals år. Hur kan min flygresa göra någon som helst skillnad?
Antingen är man man eller så är man kvinna.
Det är ju emot min yttrandefrihet.
Men måste det bli så här? Skämtar du bara?
I wish I could also dance away my problems, but unfortunately I can't, and that's mostly because I can't dance at all. Do you recognize the feeling that I think this film is trying to bring to the audience, the feeling of hopelessness, and then just finding this spark of somebody else feeling the same way? Do you recognize yourselves?
Definitely. I see, just that transformation that this person does in the dance. Love it. And I'm seeing that a lot of young people now, at least in Asia Pacific, actually taking the governments to court. That's also, from hopelessness to actually challenging them, when they make decisions. I think this kind of don't give up kind of, because actually we don't have any hope if we give up. So just continue doing that. Love the video.
But do you feel hope? Do you feel optimistic about the future? Is there a positive change coming our way, Natalie?
I do feel hope because, this conference really helped me realize that even though the work that we're all doing individually is important, we need to do it all together. We need to coordinate so that we can, really protect the most vulnerable among us. And so I have hope in that.
I agree. I also have hope in all of the young people, especially who are getting active and are seeing themselves in each other and joining up. But at the same time, I also feel quite, realistic about the situation. And I know that the power is amongst the people, but we also do need to see that change in our politicians and in the world leaders. And unless they actually take us seriously, the movement seriously, and the people talking to them seriously, and involve us and change the process and change the system, we're not going to get where we need to get fast enough. And that's where the most vulnerable are going to feel it. And we're not going to get away from that until, attitudes change seriously.
But speaking of that, what is needed from our leaders to both move forward, but also to make even more space for youth in decision making? Do we have concrete examples of this?
There's many, but I really liked what previous speaker said, that there's multiple strategies that needs to come together, inside, outside strategies. And when these things come together, that's when you have the pivoting. I mean, these young people who are here, they are leaders today and tomorrow. So I'm very hopeful in that, if they do strive to come in all aspects, as journalists, as politicians, I think there needs to be a movement where really young people claiming those spaces to actually run for office, and we're seeing that all over the place. Young people actually as heads of states. So these things are moving. But I definitely think that what we've seen during the last week here is there's a go-getting generation that are not backing down.
Yeah, and I'd just like to add, like, you know, a pocket of success, an organization I volunteer with called Care About Climate. We have an NDC equity and gender project where we analyze how much equity is mentioned in the nationally determined contributions of governments in terms of intergenerational equity and gender equity. And so just the fact that we are holding our leaders accountable in that way, yeah, there are pockets of success. And that goes back to what the question you asked earlier, that those pockets of success is what really makes me hopeful, but we need to be able to replicate them and then also to scale them up.
Do you think, or it's probably not a question about opinion, but are all regions united on this? Are all regions with us of the world in what needs to be done? Do we work as a cooperative, all nations? No?
Unfortunately not. Even within regions, you know, within countries, we're seeing increasing inequality, not just between regions, but within countries. You have this minority over-consuming and fueling the climate crisis and biodiversity loss with impacts for other regions like my own and for young people like myself. And so, unfortunately, I don't think all regions are with us. But I do think it's a minority.
Yeah, I agree. I think the most affected and the people who care were united. And the climate movement across the world and across regions is united. But as a world, across our regions, we're not, because we're still allowing the few, the minority, to cause this and to cause this damage to our climate and environment and people all over the world. So yeah, I agree with you completely.
And the consequence of this is obviously the inequality of how youth engage and are having the opportunity to engage, right?
Definitely. It looks so different between different countries also, right? From the small island state to the big nations. It's young people's opportunity to participate looks very, very different, as well as how different governments apply these global policies that are trickling down. But what I'm seeing is that young people are united. You know, the bottom-up solutions that are coming. I'm just looking at the fantastic initiative in Indonesia, Ban Plastic, run by a group of young people who actually had a national impact by, you know, really, really pushing, advocating, I mean, using all their, you know, all their artillery, and they're having impact. You know, there's so many of these fantastic stories, you know, and yeah, no, I think young people are united. I wish there was more consensus among governments to actually follow through on some of these big promises.
How do you think the past days conference will affect the next one, the COP27 in November?
I mean, at this conference, I was so happy to have not just, you know, of course, we're talking about youth today, but it's not just youth who have been raising awareness. Scientists have done an incredible job to really drive awareness, to give us specific targets, and I think they're really unrecognized. And so I hope in the lead up to COP27 we see less politicians, more youth, more scientists involved, more all non-state actors.
No, I would like to agree. I think what I saw with this conference is that it trickled down slightly differently, right? There was more groups in the discussion that I've not seen at the national, subnational level. There was more preparations, there were more coalition buildings. I mean, I just see in my office how we work with the other UN agencies very differently around in the preparations for Stockholm. And this is the way to go. So I think we'll be much more prepared for the grassroots mobilization for the next one than earlier.
Yeah, I'm going to be honest, I wasn't inside the meeting very much. I was outside preparing organizations and working with activists from all over the world. And the feedback that I got of what I heard from my fellow activists who were in was that a lot of indigenous people and youth were shoved aside in a lot of circumstances, and that they fear that it's going to be even harder at COP27. So I really hope that in the preparations for COP27 that this is taken more into account, and that so that we pass on the microphone and that we enable and empower people whose voices need to be heard to take more space.
But just on that, at COP27 with the high-level champions, I've been working on this project for the first ever youth pavilion. You know, we've had a methane pavilion at COP, but we've never had a youth pavilion. And so we need badges for young people to enter those spaces, and not only to be entering the side events and, you know, the pavilions, but be entering the negotiation spaces. So that would be a key ask, to have states, to have different NGOs, development programs support us in terms of funding the youth pavilion, in terms of badges, etc., so that people can, you know, engage on an equal footing, because even when we do come to these conferences, we're not engaging on an equal footing. We're running using public transport, and, like, you know, we have very few resources. So
more resources to young people.
Yeah, absolutely.
Unfortunately, we are reaching the end of this panel, but I want to give you the word one last time to sum it up. If you could say a sentence or two sentences to the world leaders as they prepare for COP27, what would you like to say? You each have a go. Benjamin, please start.
Yes, I think youth climate action has reached a level of maturity and is now ready to go into really the spaces of legal empowerment now, really allowing young people to access their rights, to actually claim those rights that are in the papers, they are there, governments have signed on. Now I think we're moving into the next level of, engagement, and I'm really excited about that.
Thank you.
And I guess
Isabel,
for me it would be to also not only reach out and be willing to work with every other government, but also to be self-critical, because I know Sweden especially really likes to say that we're great and we greenwash a lot, but in reality we're just as bad as pretty much every other country in the so-called global north. We're still putting mines on indigenous Sami land, we're still deforesting our forests to a huge extent. So just self-reflection, and to realize that we're still emitting huge amounts of greenhouse gases into the climate, and to have that into account and not just think we're so great.
Yeah, I would say that young people have done the work that we shouldn't even be doing. You know, we shouldn't be out there protesting and things like that. Scientists have then done their job, and now it's your time to do yours.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Natalie, Isabel, and Benjamin, for joining me here and spreading some hope, I think. I feel quite uplifted by our talk. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's time for some more music from the wonderful Sara Klang.
Maybe I'm just not meant for this. Maybe I'll die alone. Would you come back for a last kiss? Could you please come back home? The things I fear, they seem to come from where I don't know. And I feel like got a spell on me. From generations it goes on. It's so quiet now you're gone. Only rain by the windows and then wind. We used to wait still and listen to it. And I'll tell you stories from when I was a kid. The things I fear they seem to come from where I don't know. And I feel like got a spell on me. From generations it goes on. Oh, it goes on. And it goes on, always goes on.
Thank you, Sara, for that beautiful performance, and the band also, of course. So, we are coming to an end of this UNDP hour and a half, and I think that the words from the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres from his opening speech at Stockholm Plus 50 are quite good to conclude with. He said, "Throughout history, humanity has shown that we are capable of great things, but only when we work together. If we want to survive and thrive, let us protect and nurture our planet, our home, our only home. Let us recommit in words and deeds to the spirit of responsibility enshrined in the 1972 Stockholm Declaration. There is only one Earth." So thank you for joining us in this Stockholm Plus 50 Climate Hub and the UNDP Hour. Please join the discussions on our hashtags Only One Earth, hashtag Stockholm 50 and hashtag UNDP Hour. Please stay engaged and we will see you again soon, I hope. I am Clara Henry. Goodbye for now.
Thank you so much, Clara. During these 5 days,